Hello, my fellow alumni and friends of McGill. Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. Je m'appelle Luciano Diorio et je suis un fier diplômé de la promotion 1999 de la Faculté des Arts. I have the pleasure of serving as president of the McGill Alumni Association. Merci, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar entitled Nutritional Advice, Is There a Solution to the Confusion? Before I introduce our speaker, who's a McGillian who barely needs an introduction, I'm very pleased to announce that today, March 10th, is McGill 24. McGill 24 is our university's one-day fundraising campaign, notre journée annuelle de dons de l'université. Today, we invite all members of the McGill community to make a gift to areas and initiatives across the university that resonate the most with you. Last year on McGill 24, McGillians raised $2.9 million on the strength of more than 5,300 donors. It was the largest fundraiser of its kind in Canadian university history. All day, McGill 24 will feature a variety of participation challenges, meaning that each dollar raised will count for more. I invite you to visit mcgill24.ca for the real-time results of where the campaign stands and, of course, to make your gift. You will also be able to download the McGill 24 Party Pack to add some red and white flair to your social accounts or your Zoom screen. And a social media kit is available with all the instructions on how to spread the word using your Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. You are also invited to the McGill 24 events page, where you can join more activities being held throughout the day. Which brings us back to our webinar on nutritional advice, featuring our special guest speaker, Dr. Joe Schwartz. Dr. Joe will guide us through the nutritional maze that comes with almost daily reports of new miracle foods, modified foods, dietary supplements, and the like. Dr. Joe is a 2-degree holder from McGill and the director of McGill's Office for Science and Society, otherwise known as OSS. He is an award-winning educator and science presenter, well known for his informative and entertaining public lectures. I present to you Dr. Joe Schwartz.
Thanks very much for that introduction. And we're going to talk about food. Everyone, of course, is interested in what we should be putting into our mouth. A lot of confusion there. Let me take out the confusion. We can do this very simply. There we go. Eat mostly plant products, fruits, vegetables. There are many protein sources that come from plants, soy, flax, etc. Whole grains. There it is, in a nutshell. Of course, that's not enough to fill an hour of a talk. So there are some details here to work out. There's so many options out there for us. And indeed, we are lucky to have such choices. But making these choices is not always easy. Let me start out with a little professorial story for you. One day was a prof. He was going to make a point to his rather large class. And he walks over to the side of the lecture room and picks up a bottle with a wriggling live worm in it. Pours in a little bit of tobacco juice and the worm dies. Does it once more. Pours in a little bit of alcohol and the worm dies. And does it once more with some chocolate liquor and the worm dies. Looks out at the students and says, "What do you guys make out of that?" One clever little guy in the background says, "Sir, if you drink, smoke, and eat chocolate, you don't have to worry about worms." Well, obviously, he made the right observation, but came to the wrong conclusion. And science is all about making observations and coming to conclusions. And that is the emphasis of our office here at McGill. We try to shine light into the dark crevices of the world of pseudoscience. And unfortunately, that is a rather big world, with a lot of people standing on all kinds of soapboxes, screaming loudly. And they usually have some sort of nonsense to promote or some sort of vested interest. So our task is to try to counter that, counter the silliness that is out there. promoted by people like the self-anointed food babe, who believes that if you can't pronounce it, you should not be eating it. So I'm sure she would not want to have any beta-fructofuranosyl alpha-D-glucopyranoside. Of course, that is just sugar. And there are some very good reasons to curb our intake of sugar, but the fact that its chemical name is multisyllabic is not one of these. So it is a tough battle because they have learned how to cloak themselves in the garb of science. And it is getting to be harder and harder to reason with them. They're bigger and bigger challenges. And it is harder and harder to overturn their cockamamie ideas. The quacks are out there in large numbers, and they have some very, very seductive messages. Whereas, of course, in science, we don't have all the answers. And very often we have to say, well, maybe this, maybe that, we're not really sure, it needs another study. But charlatans, of course, are always ready with their conclusive answers. And they're yelling from the rooftops about what to eat, what not to eat, stay away from genetically modified foods, they tell us, stay away from preservatives. This is the kind of stuff that we mostly hear. And we do have to counter this information by trying to demystify the science. That's what we try to do through our office here at McGill. We hope to keep people up to date on what is happening in science, foster critical thinking, separate sense from nonsense, and if all of that works, hopefully keep people out of the clutches of charlatans. When we first started this venture now 21 years ago, I thought that we needed a logo, and I suggested this one to the university. It's not that we're against eating meat, although in North America we probably eat too much of it. No, what we're against is this commodity, which is being piled higher and deeper, and it's getting to be harder and harder to dig out from underneath it. It is absolutely everywhere. Now, sometimes, of course, it's just silly and easy to recognize, and everyone can understand the nonsense here. But at other times, it isn't so easy to recognize. For example, you can go into a health food store where the attendant wearing a lab coat will come up to you, week before may have been working at McDonald's sweeping floors, but all of a sudden they're nutritional experts telling you that we are being robbed of oxygen because we are putting so many pollutants into the air and it's destroying the oxygen. And oxygen is critical to our life, so we have to supplement by putting a few drops of this aerobic oxygen into a drop of water, into a glass of water and drinking it every day. So you go here for your aerobic oxygen. I don't know where you would go for your anaerobic oxygen. Anyway, this is, of course, total nonsense. The oxygen concentration of the atmosphere has been constant for millennia. And we are releasing pollutants, that's true, but that has nothing to do with the oxygen content of the air. So on the one hand, they're telling us that we need to supplement oxygen in this nonsensical way because one breath will have more oxygen in it than we would get from this supplement on a daily basis. But then they will guide you over to the next aisle in the store where they want you to buy an antioxidant. And they don't see the irony here. On the one hand, telling you how we need oxygen, and on the other hand, telling you that oxygens have to be countered by antioxidants. And of course, the silliness goes on. You can sell just about anything to scientifically illiterate public, like dehydrated water. Well, to tell you the truth, that's a joke. But this is not a joke. Apple cider vinegar with claims that it will cure everything, as you can see, from acid reflux to athlete's foot. Now, this kind of thing is very seductive, especially when they tell you that you can clean out your arteries with apple cider vinegar, because a lot of people know that they are probably not eating right, and their arteries are not in the best possible shape. So, gee, wouldn't it be great if you could just clean them out with vinegar? Of course, this isn't the case. But people are concerned because they think they're eating the wrong things. Sometimes they're right. For example, if they go to the Heart Attack Grill in Las Vegas, you can get a triple bypass burger. Yep, that's what you get there. And If you're over 350 pounds, you eat for free. That's the American way. Notice that there is an ambulance standing by. And when you go inside, you will be given, instead of napkins, you'll be given a hospital gown, and you'll be served by waitresses dressed as nurses. And it's not inappropriate, because believe it or not, now they have surpassed the triple bypass burger to the quadruple bypass burger, with a stunning total of 9,980 calories. That's an impressive amount. And you would think that there are a lot of people out there who will criticize this, and of course there are, and they will guide you towards the Impossible Burger or the Beyond Meat Burger instead. These are plant-based burgers. But you know what? In order to make any kind of a scientific decision, what you really have to do is look at the composition of the food. You have to look at the nutritional data. So, for example, in this case, we can take a look at the old-fashioned veggie burgers, then the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger, and a regular hamburger. And note, for example, that in terms of the sodium content, the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger, these plant-based burgers, are actually very high in sodium, higher than a regular burger. And when you take a look at the saturated fat content, notice also that the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Beef Burger are comparable to a regular hamburger. The old-fashioned veggie burger, which does not promote itself as tasting like meat, has a very low fat content. So, of course, it's always important to look at the data. And you can see here that the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger actually are not nutritionally superior to a regular hamburger, and they are indeed highly processed. Although I must say that they taste surprisingly good. I was surprised when I first tasted these. Anyway, you would think that there's a lot of opposition to eating all of that meat. And if you take a look at this book by William Davis, who surprisingly is a cardiologist, in this book, Wheat Belly, he doesn't actually criticize eating meat. What he's after is the bun, because that contains gluten, and to him, gluten is the big evil. Well, the fact is that there has been a lot of research done on gluten, and it does not have any impact on people's health, unless, of course, you are suffering from celiac disease. That's a different story. Then you have to be very careful about your choices, and you have to scrupulously avoid gluten. But otherwise, you don't. Well, books are a dime a dozen these days in terms of nutrition. We're told that not only you can't eat carbohydrates because of the gluten, you can't drink milk. It's a deadly poison. They tell you that the human is the only animal that ever drinks milk past the age of weaning. Every other animal is smart enough not to do that. Well, of course, the human is also the only animal that has gone to the moon and to Mars and designs computers, because we do have a brain. We're told that you can't eat vegetable oils because you heat them and they form toxins. You can't eat soy either. It contains estrogenic compounds. And of course, beef is a real no-no because it's linked to all kinds of disease. You can't eat any sugar, but you can't eat any sugar replacements either. So you're left with the conclusion that you just cannot eat. And if you do eat, well, then you better know how to detox yourself. And of course, there are numerous nonsensical detox regimens out there. They never actually tell you what you are detoxing from, what kind of toxins you're addressing when you go by these regimens. So there's a lot of silliness out there in the world of nutrition. And it's not surprising that so many people are just lost and confused, because this data just keeps coming at us on a regular basis. I mean, every day, every minute, there are about 5 scientific papers published. So it's impossible to keep up with all of the information. So of course, it leads to a lot of bewilderment. I mean, one day we're told that butter is the real problem because of the saturated fat content, and we should be switching to margarine because it has less saturated fat. And then we find out that it's actually margarine that's killing us because it contains trans fats. And back and forth it goes in this fashion. And indeed, it is very interesting to note that you can find a study to back up virtually any view that you have. You can find a study that will show you that tomatoes cause cancer or that they don't. The same thing for potatoes or for onions or for lemons. Although note that the only food for which there has been no positive study is bacon. And believe it or not, it is the fastest growing food in North America. So although people may claim that they're listening to nutritional information, the evidence suggests that they are actually not. You know, it used to be that we would sit down to dinner, and the only thing that mattered was what it tasted like. If it tasted good, we ate it, and we enjoyed it. But boy, have things changed. Now we become critical. We ask questions about everything. We want to know if there are nitrites in that hot dog, and if there are, is there enough vitamin C to counter the effect of producing nitrosamines? We go to a restaurant, we expect to be told about the fat content, the vitamin content. We want our waiters to be up to date on nutritional information. Now, it's not that there's something wrong with that, of course not, because the fact is that we are what we eat. That's not just an old adage, that's a statement of scientific fact. I mean, let's face it, food is the only raw material that ever goes into our body. So of course we are what we eat. So it's legitimate to ask questions about what we should eat and what we should not eat. The human body is just one large bag of chemicals, and there are chemical reactions going on inside our body all the time, which together constitute life. But to most people, the word chemical is something that you find in a flask in the laboratory. No, everything in the world, of course, is made up of chemicals, and so are we. And the chemicals that are present in food basically determine what happens in our body, because food is the only raw material that ever enters our body. But we, of course, also are what we read. That's how we know what we should be eating and what not. A researcher will carry out a study, they will submit a paper about this, eventually it gets published, and then we get some information about what we should be doing. So we are what we eat, but what we should be eating depends on what we read. Well, one day we will wake up in the morning and find out that poutine is killing us. You know what that is? That's this Quebec delicacy of French fries with some cheese, all smothered in some gravy of unknown etiology. But it tastes good, which is right away a warning, because generally something that tastes so good can be good for us, and that's the issue here. So every day we get some warning about what not to eat. But we also get advice about what to eat to counter all the negative aspects of food that we should not have eaten. For example, this particular day, it happened to be pomegranate juice, because pomegranates, according to this article, have been prized since biblical times for their healing and anti-aging powers. Well, you know what? In science, we like to have a bit more information than just being prized since antiquity. History does not confer truth. Just because something has been consumed for a long time doesn't mean that it has been beneficial. So one always has to look a bit further into it. Now, in this case, of course, the reference is to the Bible, and it's interesting. Of course, you know the beginning of the Bible when Eve tempted Adam with, I know that the answer that you're thinking of is an apple, and it wasn't that. I can't tell you what the fruit of the tree of knowledge was, but it wasn't an apple, because apples didn't grow in that part of the world till the Middle Ages. But of course, the Bible does not say it was an apple either. It just says the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What could it have been? You know what? It could have been a pomegranate, because these fruits are known to have grown in the Middle East since time immemorial, and that supposedly is where the Garden of Eden was. And that would have been a very good choice for the fruit of the tree of knowledge, because pomegranates contain natural aromatase inhibitors. And these are very interesting compounds. Why? Because if you go into the lab and you take cultured breast cancer cells and bathe them in pomegranate juice, they multiply less quickly. What does that really mean? It means that if you go into the lab, take cultured breast cancer cells, bathe them in pomegranate juice, they multiply less quickly. That's all that it means. You cannot extrapolate from that and suggest that pomegranates are the way to cheat death, or that pomegranate juice is like a superpower, or like your physician, and that it puts you on life support, unless, of course, you're in the business of promoting this product. Then you can make these claims until you get caught and have to pay a fine for making false claims, as Pom has had to do. But of course, they pay the fine and then they're back doing the same thing again. And it's so easy to cherry pick some data, or in this case, pomegranate pick some data and make claims. Let me give you an example of how one could do this. If you go to the foothills of the Himalayas, the diet there features a lot of dried apricots because that's what they have. I suspect they would rather eat a steak with French fries and dill pickle, but they don't have that. So they eat a lot of apricots. And this is the area of the world where James Hilton located his classic novel, Lost Horizon, Shangri-La, where people live incredible long times. And there actually is a place in Pakistan where these claims are made, that people lived up to 120. The only problem is they don't have birth certificates. You see, this gentleman may only be 39. It's a tough life there, going up and down the Himalayas. But anyway, one could say, look, these people claim to live to 120. They eat a lot of dried apricots. Dried apricots contain a lot of beta carotene. And beta carotene is an antioxidant. It's great for us. One could lead people down this path and suggest to them that they better go out and start loading up on beta carotene, whether it comes from the health food store, or they better start eating lots of carrots in order to pump them up with beta carotene. Of course, this makes no sense at all, because the lifestyle of these people is totally different from our lifestyle. There are many, many other differences than just eating dried apricots. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the beta carotene, but certainly it's not something that is going to explain living to 120. Indeed, if some of these people do live to 120, which of course is highly debatable. But you can take any food and pick data out of its composition and make it sound like an angel or like a devil. Even an apple. I think most of us would agree that an apple is a healthy thing to eat. But what are you really eating when you bite into that apple? This. That's what you're eating. These are not additives. These are not pesticide residues. That's what the apple is made of. For example, you'll find some acetone. Now, the last time you encountered that was on the bottle of your nail polish remover, where it says, do not drink. Good advice. Because acetone can be highly toxic. It can kill you. But also in that apple, you have formaldehyde. You know what that is? That's the stuff that embalmers use to preserve dead bodies. It's a very effective preservative. It is also deadly substance, formaldehyde is. So I can tell you, did you know that when you're eating an apple, you're getting acetone, which can kill you, but it's an economical way to go because you'll be pre-embalmed by the formaldehyde. Now, that might rub you the wrong way. And there is some 2-propanol, which you may recognize as rubbing alcohol in that apple as well. So I could leave you with the impression, if I so chose, that that apple is actually taking a bite out of us. But of course, it's total nonsense, even though everything I told you is true. The apple contains acetone. It contains formaldehyde. It does contain rubbing alcohol. But the amounts are insignificant. So let's lay the cornerstone of toxicology once more, as was done over 500 years ago by the great sage Paracelsus, who said that only the dose makes the poison. Yes, acetone and formaldehyde can be poisons, but in far, far greater amounts than what you would find in an apple. So an apple is very safe to eat. We should be encouraging the eating of apples. This we know because we can look at the peer-reviewed literature, and there are a lot of articles there promoting the benefits of a diet that contains lots of fruits and vegetables. And this is what we rely on. We worship at the altar of peer review in the realm of science. We want to know that experts in the field have reviewed the research and have deemed it to be worth publicizing. Of course, it doesn't mean that it is set in stone, because humans are humans and humans are flawed. And if someone is going to submit a paper that is fraudulent, you're not going to pick that up until someone attempts to reproduce that paper, such as we had in the horrible case of Andrew Wakefield with that paper that suggested that there's a link between vaccination and autism. Until people try to reproduce the effect, we didn't know that this basically was all nonsense and it was a fraudulent paper. So today we go by peer-reviewed literature. But of course, we didn't always have peer-reviewed literature to guide us. We go back 2,000 years, people listened to Hippocrates long before any peer-reviewed literature was around. And Hippocrates and others like him would give advice. For example, let thy food be thy medicine. Questionable whether he actually ever said that, but he may have. And that would have been wise, because in those days, of course, nobody knew how the body worked. Nobody knew anything about nutritional components of food. So that was quite inventive to say that. But Hippocrates also said, let us excuse the passion. Well, we don't have any evidence for that. He also suggested that pigeon droppings were great for baldness. And as you can see by his own evidence, it didn't work very well, but mercifully, you didn't have to eat the droppings. You would rub them on top of your head. And he also said flax is great for the intestines, which happens to be true. So back in those days, nutritional advice was a mixture of sense and nonsense, as it is today. Let's take a look at flax, for example. The seeds of the flax plant, they are consumed. They're eaten all around the world. What do we know about them? Well, what we know is what has been written in the scientific literature. They do contain omega-3 fats, which are judged to be healthy. They reduce the risk of cardiac arrhythmia, for example. They also contain compounds called lignans, which in the laboratory have anti-cancer effects. So all of that sounds pretty good. They contain fiber, the little brooms that will clean out your intestine. So all of that is good stuff. We know this again because it has been published in peer-reviewed papers. In this particular case, Dr. Lillian Thompson, University of Toronto, Canada's second best university, article published on lignans and isoflavones, for example. And what she found was that ground flaxseed put into muffins to the tune of 25 grams per muffin reduced the incidence of breast cancer in patients who previously had been diagnosed with the disease. That is, the recurrence was reduced. A very interesting finding, which of course got the attention of the press, and all of a sudden, there were articles about flax preventing cancer. But in science, very often, it's the details that matter. And if you read the paper very carefully, what you find is that the risk of breast cancer indeed was reduced, but only in premenopausal overweight women. So it was not a universal finding. But people don't read in between the lines, because mostly people want geese that lay golden eggs. They want magical solutions. They want to know that if they just eat right, they're going to live forever. Well, unfortunately, geese that lay golden eggs only exist in fairy tales. In real life, we don't have them. But we do have chickens that lay golden eggs, at least as far as a farmer is concerned. If he is selling omega-3 eggs because you can charge 3 times as much for these. What's going on here? Well, it's an interesting story. Eggs, as you know, have a checkered history because the egg yolk contains cholesterol, and cholesterol has been linked with heart disease. So people have developed a fear of eggs, which essentially is unfounded because although cholesterol is an issue, it's not the preformed cholesterol, but it's cholesterol that your body manufactures in response to saturated fats. But anyway, egg marketers noticed a slump in their sales because of the concern about cholesterol. So they wondered what to do. So while their sales were slumping, the sales of fish were booming because of the omega-3 fats, these magical fats that were said to be in fish. So they wondered, how can we get some of this benefit into our eggs? So first they tried feeding fish meal to chickens. That didn't work out too well. The eggs had a fishy taste. But then they discovered that flax seeds also contain omega-3 fats, although not exactly the same ones that you find in fish, but omega-3s that in the body can be converted to the fish fats, although not very efficiently. So the question was, can we feed the chickens flaxseed, get some omega-3 into the eggs and advertise it? And the answer was, yes, you can do that. And sales of omega-3 eggs jumped. Of course, the question comes up, why do we need the chicken, the middleman? Why don't we just eat the ground flaxseed ourselves? And you do have to grind it, otherwise it goes in the way that it went out. Otherwise it comes out the way that it went in. So why not do this? We can do this. Let's face it. We have flaxseed bread available. We have flaxseed bagels available. At least we do here in Montreal. We happen to be lucky. We live in the Mecca of bageldom. And we do have all kinds of bagel, including flaxseed bagel, 25 grams of ground flaxseed per bagel, the same amount that Dr. Thompson used in her studies. Of course, the bagel is inedible, but it does have 25 grams of ground flaxseed. And certainly any bagel is superior to its cousin, which is the donut. In the case of the bagel, you can eat the whole thing. With the donut, you should restrict yourself to eating the whole. Why? Well, first of all, a lot of sugar, a lot of fat, a lot of calories in that donut. And we know what the consequences of that are. But nevertheless, it tastes good. People want it. They go to the Krispy Kreme emporiums, watch as their donuts are being made, and still end up eating them. You see that pipe in the back? That's where fresh fat, liquid fat, keeps coming in because so much is absorbed by the donuts as they float by being fried that the fat constantly has to be replenished. Then the donuts go under the glazer where they are coated with some more sugar and some more fat, and presto, you have what has been called a heart attack on a plate. Because the fat that is used here contains a lot of trans fats. This, unfortunately, is what happens in a lot of commercial establishments because these kind of fats can be reused over and over again. And this is the problem here. It is the type of fat that we consume that controls the amount of cholesterol that circulates in our bloodstream. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about, what cholesterol is. I mean, cholesterol is an essential substance for the body, although we don't need it in the diet because the body can make all the cholesterol it needs. It's a starting material for a lot of hormones, like the sex hormones. But generally, people hear the word cholesterol and they don't want any of it, no matter what, without putting it into proper context. And anytime a study that comes out that shows that our blood levels of cholesterol can be lowered, that study gets a lot of attention. Many of you will remember when studies came out about oat bran, that's the outer covering of the oat, reducing blood cholesterol. Well, up to that time, oat bran was a cheap commodity that was sold as horse feed. Farmers were happy to get rid of it. But now it became a quasi-drug, and all of a sudden, they took it out of the mouths of horses, they put it on our breakfast plate. So we were eating the horse food, they were eating our food. People thought that all of their dietary sins would be forgiven if only somehow they could squeeze more oat bran into their life. Dirty potato chips, bring them on. If you could just sprinkle it on a cigar, that's great. Of course, in science, when you tell someone that oat bran can lower cholesterol, there's several questions that immediately come to mind. One is, what in oat bran is it that does this? And how much of that do we have to eat? And how much does it lower cholesterol? Because science reverberates around numbers. Well, we can answer the first question very easily. The actual component in oat bran that lowers cholesterol is something called beta-glucan. It's a form of soluble fiber. How much of this you have to eat? Well, about 3 grams of beta-glucan is the minimal amount that will have any effect on blood cholesterol. Of course, then the question is, how much oat bran do you have to eat to get 3 grams of beta-glucan? And that's about a cup of oat bran cereal. That's a challenge to eat. Oat bran is not one of God's gifts to the palate. You got to dress it up somehow. You have to put berries or something in there to give it a taste. But it still is a challenge. On the other hand, oat bran muffins are not very challenging to eat. But the fact is that if you ate enough oat bran muffins to get your beta-glucan, you'd be overdosing on sugar. So what's the answer here? I think oatmeal. It is not a difficult thing to eat a cup and a half of oatmeal. I'm not going to suggest that it's any kind of magical commodity. Of course not. But it is better than eating a Danish for breakfast. And of course, you can dress it up with something like berries. But when you look at something like Cheerios, they have also discovered that the O stands for oat bran. Well, you know what? The O also stands for 0, which is close to the amount of beta-glucan that you get in here. You'd have to eat about 5 servings every day to get your 3 grams of beta-glucan. And then, of course, you'd be getting too much sugar. Even though Cheerios is one of the better cereals, it doesn't have as much sugar as the others. So numbers are very, very important in science. And yes, I'm a big fan of oatmeal. I'll admit it. I think it makes for a great breakfast. You don't add any sugar to it, but you can certainly add berries to it. But there are people who will tell you that there are magical diets out there. If you just eat the right way, you won't get sick, or if you get sick, you can eat away your illness. There are numerous books like this. I like to pick on Fit for Life because it's been around for over 2 decades. This book is still popular, written by Harvey and Marilyn Diamond with no science background whatsoever. Of course, you don't need a science background for popular writing. You need to charm the reader and seduce them with easy solutions to complex problems. I first heard of them, this now goes back over 20 years, when a student brought me this little passage handwritten on a piece of paper. I hadn't read the book at that time, but she had, and she wanted my opinion on this. Within atoms and molecules reside the vital elements we know as enzymes. Enzymes are not things or substances. They're the life principle in the atoms and molecules of every living cell. When I first saw this, I thought it was a joke. I thought someone had sat down and said to themselves, what's the greatest amount of scientific nonsense that can be squeezed into the fewest words? Of course, enzymes are just molecules. You can put them in a bottle, you can have them on the shelf. But to these people, enzymes were sort of like the soul of food, which you would destroy by processing it. This is just total nonsense. They told us that the greatest threat to our food was processed food. Well, as you'll see in a few minutes, I'm not championing processed food at all. But the greatest threat to our health, greater than smoking, greater than not exercising? No, I don't think so. And indeed, the day that science entered the food industry, was not a sad day. It was a glorious day. We figured out, for example, that if you supplement salt with iodine, you reduce the chance of thyroid disease. We figured out that if you add vitamin D to milk, reduce the chance of rickets. So processed food is not the hellish substance that it is so often made out to be. What do they mean by processed food? Foods that contain additives. For example, they point a finger at sliced white bread. I'm not going to tell you that this is a nutritious food. Of course not. We should be eating whole grain, sourdough bread. I think that's what I like. But they say that you should stay away from white bread because it contains preservatives, as if that were an evil thing. It does contain preservatives, because if it wouldn't, within a few days, that's what the bread looks like. And market studies have shown that people do not buy this kind of bread. And they should not, because molds do contain a lot of toxic metabolites. That's why we add a chemical called calcium propionate as a preservative to make this safer. Don't get the idea that a baker can just decide they're going to add calcium propionate. No, this has to jump through all the regulatory hoops and hurdles, which in this case was not difficult because, believe it or not, we actually produce calcium propionate in our body. It's there in our underarm secretions. It is a byproduct of fat metabolism. We actually sweat preservatives, believe it or not, which is interesting because it explains a feature of French life. If you've ever been to France and bought a baguette, you know you have to eat it within about 17 seconds of buying it because it starts to go hard. No preservatives. But you know the traditional way the Frenchman carries his baguette home. The ultimate in natural preservation. Well, talking about the French, what about this business of the French paradox, which proposes that the reason that heart disease is more rare in France than in North America is because of something in the French lifestyle. The question is, what is that paradox? Why is it that the coronary artery disease rate in France is 1/4 that in North America? Why is it that they eat those buttery croissants, those fatty cheeses, they stuff their geese and eat their fatty liver? They still have less heart disease than we have. How can we explain this? Well, the French watch more Jerry Lewis movies per capita than any other nation in the world. Obviously, this is not the reason that they have less heart disease. Jerry Lewis is not protective against heart disease. It's been said that he actually causes it. No, but the association is there. And I just bring this up to show that an association does not mean a cause and effect relationship. So before we start, clamoring about red wine protecting us from heart disease, because the French drink much more red wine than we do in North America, which of course is true. They drink a lot of red wine. They do have less disease. However, before we start giving our kids alcohol and try to justify this French paradox, we better look into it more deeply. Well, 60 Minutes, about 20 years ago, presented an episode on the French paradox, where they proposed that it was due to red wine, and that caused people on the Monday morning to strip shelves in liquor stores of red wine, contemplating giving alcoholic beverages to their kids to protect them. Well, the fact is that this is an association. It's not a cause and effect relationship. But whenever you have an association, it does suggest that one should look into it more deeply, because there might be a cause and effect relationship. So we have looked into red wine for the last 20 years, discovered that it does contain an interesting compound called resveratrol, which has all kinds of potential benefits. And there are a lot of studies that have been published on resveratrol, as you can see, and mostly animal studies, test tube studies, some human intervention trials, and the press has made a great deal of this. However, what they constantly fail to point out, that the amount of resveratrol that has been shown to be of benefit is the amount that is found in about 100 bottles of red wine. So no one is suggesting that wine contains sufficient amount of resveratrol. What we can say is that maybe if this research is furthered and it holds up, then it may be possible to have supplements of resveratrol, because we don't want to overdo the drinking of alcoholic beverages, because alcohol itself is a known carcinogen. We know that alcohol increases the risk of cancers of the mouth, of the larynx, and of the breast. So it may be possible in the future to circumvent that by taking resveratrol pills. But there are problems here as well, because it is very difficult to stabilize this molecule. It's a very labile molecule. And of course, with the way that dietary supplements are regulated, we have no confirmation that the bottle actually contains what it says on the label, because nobody really checks for that. But it's easy to lead someone down the garden path by saying, look, the French have a low incidence of heart disease, which in fact is debatable, because some people say that they just fill out death certificates differently. But you can say they have less heart disease, they drink more red wine. Red wine contains resveratrol, we should be taking resveratrol supplements. But we just don't have the science to advocate that. What we can say is that populations that eat more fruits and vegetables do have lower rates of heart disease and many other diseases as well. We have seen that over and over again in population studies. But there are no superfoods. There are good diets and there are poor diets. Oregano, which is widely marketed as some kind of superfood. You can read about it in books like The Cures in the Cupboard, where they will tell you that no matter what ails you, from allergies to zits, you just take oil of oregano and it will solve the problem. No, this is a misleading concept. There are no such simple solutions to complex difficulties. The problem is that we do know some secrets of eating smarter, but they are not so seductive. Telling people to eat mostly plant foods, to eat a lot of broccoli instead of sugar, no, that isn't nearly as seductive as saying, take this pill and everything is going to be okay. We have a real problem in North America with overweight. That is for sure. And overweight predisposes to heart disease, it predisposes to cancer. This we have seen over and over again. A lot of this is because of our overconsumption of sugar. Now, there's nothing wrong with sugar per se. It's not the devil incarnate. It's the amount of sugar that we consume. And Mary Poppins told us a little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. Well, who are we to criticize Mary Poppins? Well, yeah, a little bit of sugar may make the medicine go down, but a lot of sugar makes the soft drink go down. And soft drinks, of course, are consumed in huge amounts here in North America. And this is a real problem, because we are seeing studies which actually link disease to soft drink consumption. It is the overconsumption of soft drinks that's the problem. And in North America, we do consume a tremendous amount of soft drinks, both regularly sweetened and artificially sweetened, in gigantic doses. In Europe, these doses would fill a bathtub, right? But here we consume tremendous amounts and we overdose on sugar. Now, just to give you an example, and I don't mean to pick on Coke, it's just that it's representative of all soft drinks. And that's a small can of Coke, it's only 280 ml. That's the amount of sugar it contains. You don't see it because, of course, it's dissolved in the liquid. Now, to be fair, the same amount of sugar is found in apple juice and in orange juice. However, here at least you're getting some vitamins and minerals along with it. With the soft drink, all you're getting is the sugar. There are also issues of what you eat or together with the soft drink, right? And we eat too much meat in North America. There's no need for the 16-ounce steak hanging off the plate. You can go for the 4-ounce. But there's also a question of how you cook it. Because if you cook meat at a high temperature, you form polycyclic hydrocarbons and advanced glycation end products. Those are linked to cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. There's also a question about processed meats like salami. And it's disturbing that we find that consuming this on a regular basis is linked to colorectal cancer. I'm bothered by that because my background is Hungarian, and in Hungary, salami is a vegetable, tofu is illegal. And of course, it doesn't mean that you can never have this, but you don't want to have a salami sandwich for lunch every day. Numbers matter. Of course, we should be eating unprocessed foods as much as possible because we are getting more and more information about ultra-processed foods being linked to various types of disease. But what does ultra-processed food mean? You know, what do we make of information like this? That if you eat a lot of processed foods, you increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, etc. What do we make of this? What is this ultra-processed food? I think most people have a general idea. The processed food is what you mouth waters to eat, and the unprocessed is stuff. Oh yeah, this is what I should eat for health. But that's what we should be guiding ourselves by. Staying away from all the fast foods, the highly processed foods. Go for foods as close to the way that nature formed them as possible. There's also an issue with packaging of foods, and you probably heard about this these days, because in order to make sure that the packaging doesn't soak through with water or with fat, we use substances that prevent that from happening. And these are the perfluoroalkyl substances. And there are concerns about these because, once again, they fall into the carcinogen category. The question is, how much do we have to be exposed to in order to potentially cause harm? And nobody's really sure, unfortunately. And the industry is certainly working on ridding our environment from these PFASs, as they are called. So to sum up, yes, our diet should feature mostly vegetable products. Whether it is organic or not, I don't think matters. The differences are minute. Yes, you can find more pesticide residues in conventional food, but that doesn't mean that that's a problem. Just because something is there doesn't mean that it's doing harm. These days, with our instruments, our gas chromatographs, or spectrometers, we can find substances down to parts per trillion. That's not finding a needle in a haystack. That's finding a needle in a world full of haystacks. Part per trillion is the width of a credit card and the distance from the Earth to the moon. We can find that. But just because it's there doesn't mean that it is causing harm. The presence of a chemical does not equal the presence of risk. But unfortunately, so often in the media, numbers are left out. And it's just a question of, is it toxic or is it not? That's an unrealistic question and has no answer until you bring numbers into play. The dose makes the poison. Finally, questions about dietary supplements. Is it possible that if we don't have the ideal diet, and of course most of us don't, is it possible to fill in the gaps with dietary supplements? And of course, the jury is out on this. But what we have seen over the years is that the more we study this, the more we see that there are no benefits to be had, except in people who have some terrible diet. And these usually are people who don't have the money to buy supplements anyway. But we are seeing over and over again that the initial optimism that was seen for these supplements is not borne out by more subsequent studies. There's one, perhaps, that I should mention, because here in North America in the winter, due to the angle of the sun, we don't have enough exposure to generate vitamin D in our body. Vitamin D is very often called the sunshine vitamin, but of course it's not contained in the sunshine. It is formed in the body when a molecule reacts with sunlight. We could certainly use supplements in the winter here. Up to 1,000 IU is no problem whatsoever. It is totally safe. And there's really no argument against taking a vitamin D supplement. I wish that we had better arguments for taking it, But I think in this case, even though we don't have total evidence, I think it is pretty smart in the winter to supplement just in case we might have a deficiency. And then finally, let me remind you of this. Exercise. It doesn't get talked about enough. Everyone talks about what we should eat and what we should not eat. The fact is that the way to stretch out your years is with exercise. We have seen over and over again that the better shape you are in, the better chance you have of overcoming the hurdles of life. And it does not have to be excruciating exercise. Just walking does the job. And here again, we are learning more and more about this, about the benefits of walking, which are almost as good as running. Of course, you don't want to be jauntering around. You want to be walking at a good clip, but a 30 to 40 minute walk a day is probably the single most important thing you can do for your health. Obviously, you do want to watch your diet. You don't want to be stuffing yourself with the classic North American foods. We need to control our caloric intake. We need to control our fat intake, and we need to control our sugar intake. But just to finish off here, let me remind you that we are lucky to be able to talk about the issues that we talked about here today, because every 3.5 seconds in the world, somebody dies purely from not having enough food to eat. And since I've been chatting here, there have been about 1,000 people who are no longer with us. They would be very happy to have our additive-laden, genetically modified foods. So we have the luxury of worrying about whether we should have sugar or aspartame in our food. And let's recognize that we have an obligation to make sure that everyone has the same opportunities in the world as we have today. Because we are right now producing enough food, it is just not being spread around well enough. And the problem is going to increase more and more, because pretty soon 10 billion people will be coming to dinner, and we'll have to have better technology to feed them. Now, I know that this raises a lot of questions. Science cannot possibly answer all the questions. There are some questions that just don't have answers. And I know that we don't have time to answer questions here, but let me remind you that we have a website where you can come, and we have answered many, many questions there. We have thousands, literally thousands and thousands of articles on our website. You can do a search for whatever interests you. And also on our website, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter that comes your way free. Every Saturday morning, it will appear in your inbox, and it's a mix of entertainment and information. And it is all based on peer-reviewed literature. So mcgill.ca/OSS is the website, and you can get all the information about the activities in which we are engaged right there. And I would like to thank you for your interest here, and just take a moment to remind you that McGill 24 is this once-a-year event where the university appreciates any contribution that you can make. And as you know, COVID has made everything financially much more challenging. So whatever contribution you can make is much appreciated. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. I have to say that there's some of those slides. I'm sure some of the people that attended here today are probably going to have a hard time unseeing those slides. But more importantly, how are we going to react in our next trip to the grocery store when we see oregano, salami, and apples? You have changed the dynamic for me, certainly, and probably for most of us on this call. But thank you so much for all of your time today and sharing your knowledge and the OSS office's knowledge with all of us today. So thank you for that information and that nutritional advice. I do want to say and remind everybody that you can hear more from Dr. Joe and his colleagues, A Dose of Silence, which is the bi-weekly web series produced by OSS that covers a variety of timely science topics. Episodes are available every other Thursday at noon, as Dr. Joe had suggested, Montreal time via the OSS YouTube channel. And finally, McGill 24 is still ongoing. I was just checking the website right now. We are at almost at the $2 million mark, which is very, very impressive. And so thank you if you have made your donation and gift to McGill. Really, really appreciate it. And of course, we suggest that you go visit the website of mcgill.ca throughout the day to see the campaign's real-time progress. And also consider making your own gift of any amount and to any cause that McGill holds, that you hold as a special meaning for you. So thank you for your participation. Merci beaucoup d'être là aujourd'hui. Please keep in touch with us and continue to keep safe. Thank you again.